And any showers will fade away, with most of the cloud also melting away, leaving a clear but chilly evening. Any showers across the Midlands will tend to become confined to northern and eastern parts, with skies largely clear elsewhere. Once the sun sets, skies will clear further, giving a cold night for all. After an afternoon of sunshine and showers, northern England will see a dry evening with skies turning increasingly clear. Just like elsewhere, it will be a chilly end to the day with a frost forming. Moving into Scotland, and the showers will continue across some northern and eastern areas, with these wintry across the higher ground. Elsewhere, there will be some late sunshine to end the day. And Northern Ireland will also see some late sunshine, and apart from the odd, very isolated shower, it will be a dry end to the day for most. Overnight, most will be dry and clear, leading to a cold night with widespread frost developing, especially in the countryside. And that is how the weather is shaping up overnight and into tomorrow morning.
Start off your GB News Sunday with Stephen and Anne at breakfast from 6 a.m. At 10, join the political correction. From 12 till 6, it's Alistair, Darren, Inaya and Nana. At 7, join Free Speech Nation for a laugh that won't be cancelled. At 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight, followed by Headliners. That's Sunday on GB News.
I'm Neil Oliver. You can join me live every Saturday evening for opinions and discussions about the week's top stories. There's also a smattering of history and archaeology and features that define our great British Isles. You'll hear my thoughts unfiltered, as well as those of my guests, and we don't always agree. And we want to hear from you too. Neil Oliver Live, Saturdays from 7 on GB News.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Neil Oliver Live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight we'll be looking at the Ofsted report of how children's education and development has been affected by the pandemic regulations. And we'll be talking about mindfulness and mental health with Brenda Shanky, a meditation and mindfulness coach who is someone who's had it all but still battled with her own demons. And I am, of course, as always, joined by a brilliant panel, research fellow at the Bow Group, Benjamin Loughnane, and author and commentator Laura Dodsworth. Lovely to have you both with me. Plus, we will be speaking about how our cashless society has affected charities across the nation. All of that and more coming up, but first, an update on the latest news from Bethany Elsey.
Thanks, Neil. Good evening. I am Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has pledged economic and defensive military support to Ukraine following talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. The Prime Minister said he made his surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital as a show of our unwavering support for the people of Ukraine. Britain has agreed to send 120 armoured vehicles and new anti-ship missile systems to support the country against Russia's aggression. Boris Johnson says together with allies, the UK is going to ratchet up the economic pressure and continue to intensify week-by-week sanctions against Russia.
Together with friends and partners, we, the UK and others, supply the equipment, the technology, the know-how, the intelligence, so that Ukraine will never be invaded again.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials have urged civilians in the eastern region of Luhansk to flee as Russia is amassing new forces. The governor there warned that Russia is preparing a new offensive as shelling has increased in recent days. Ukraine has been warning that Russia plans intensified attacks in the country's east and south after withdrawing its troops from areas the north of Kyiv. President Zelensky said the country was preparing for a tough battle ahead. The royal family has released a poetic tribute to mark the first anniversary of the Duke of Edinburgh's death. The poem, written by the poet laureate Simon Armitage, is called The Patriarchs, an elegy. He died on this day last year at Windsor Castle, just months short of his 100th birthday.
Husbands to duty, they unrolled their plans across billiard tables and vehicle bonnets, regrouped at breakfast. What their secrets were was everyone's guess and nobody's business. Great-grandfathers from birth, in time they became both inner core and outer case in a family heirloom of nesting dolls.
Against the odds, at 50-1, Noble Yates has won this year's Grand National at Aintree. Trained by Emma Mullins, the 7-year-old horse beat 15-2 favourite Any Second Now to Pip the Post. Delta Work was third. Noble Yates was ridden by amateur Sam Whaley-Cohen on his last ever ride, taking the title from last year's winner, Rachel Blackmore, who rode Millennia Times. The jockey described his win as a fairy tale. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver.
There are debts that can be repaid and debts that can't. During the time of COVID, vast piles of money were conjured into being by the government, borrowed as if by magic from the distant future. Unimaginable quantities of that funny money were wasted, spent on PPE that didn't work or that wasn't needed, and is now yet more plastic heaped into landfills or otherwise littering the landscape and seascape. Millions went on the Nightingale hospitals that were never used. Around £37 billion, 10% of a total of £370 billion set aside for bounce-back loans and the Eat Out to Help scheme, were lost to fraudsters. £37 billion lost to fraud and gone for good. Whatever the final figure for the theft, that money has simply been written off as irrecoverable. Taxpayers will foot the bill for it all eventually, of course, along with paying back the rest of the trillions sprayed around with abandon by a government of headless chickens. Furlough schemes paid billions more to employers so they could pay and thereby retain staff sent home to months of lockdowns during which the economy ground to a halt. All that debt has to be repaid too by taxpayers. Hundreds of thousands of people, at least, many of them self-employed, did not qualify for any help at all, while simultaneously being barred from going to work to try and earn livings for themselves and their families. To add insult to injury, those who received nothing, many who thereby lost everything, who had their noses pressed up against the outside of a window showing a financial feast to which they were not even invited, still have to put their hands in empty pockets to pay for help enjoyed by others but denied to them. Those debts, including sums squandered, sums exploited by friends of those in power, will eventually have to be repaid, you might reasonably assume, one way or another. Even if the sums concerned are so eye-wateringly huge, those accounts will be glowing red for decades. It's only money, you might say. You might say that if you've never gone without. But then there are the other debts that can't be repaid and will never be repaid. Many and determined were the voices that warned and kept warning month after month that society was being undone by lockdown and the masking of faces, the isolation and perhaps worst of all the incessant fear deliberately whipped up by government nudge units and pushed day after day until too many souls didn't know which way was up and still don't. All of it was deliberately inflicted upon millions of people, some of them the most vulnerable, the poor, the elderly, children. There were warnings of inevitable damage to mental health, to physical health, and so it has come to pass. The NHS has acknowledged what it has described as a second pandemic of depression, anxiety, psychosis and eating disorders. So overwhelmed are specialists, they are bouncing back many of those in need of help to the GPs who referred them, even those most at risk from suicide, self-harm and starvation. Doctors have warned people will simply die of conditions that must only be left untreated. And then there are the children, and yet more debts that cannot be repaid. An Ofsted report says face masks and lockdowns have left a generation of our youngest children struggling to crawl, walk, talk, dress themselves, make friends, even to go to the toilet unaided. Children that are 2 years old now spent their whole lives in a locked-down, masked-up world. Many of those of the poorest families spent weeks and months in homes with no outside spaces, stuck in rooms watching screens of one sort or another. The same report revealed children were mimicking the voices of cartoon characters after long hours spent watching and listening to nothing else. The authors noted in the simplest terms that youngsters had missed out on, quote, stories, singing and having conversations, end quote. Babies born and raised in masked worlds are, quote, struggling to respond to facial expressions, particularly anxious and not used to seeing different faces, end quote. Stories, singing, playing, talking, seeing faces. After being fed and held in loving arms, these are among the most fundamental necessities of childhood. Tens of thousands of years ago, our ancestors knew it mattered to tell their children stories, to sing them songs, so that all that had been learned by the ancestors would not be forgotten and the tribe would remain closely bound by the sharing of it all. That some stories and songs have come down to us from a time beyond the reach of memory is testament to how much they were deemed to matter. Behaviour that was possible and essential around campfires in worlds separated from our own by ice ages was thrown away by ours. What is lost or denied at the beginning of a life is not necessarily obtained or regained later. That an Ofsted report should find such basic life experience knowingly denied to millions of our youngest is appalling, unforgivable and shaming. This is nothing less than neglect. Wholesale neglect by society of the most precious and vulnerable resource we have. All of it was avoidable and should have been avoided. The decision to lock down and to enforce mask wearing was, I say, utterly wrong. And yet this week, when questioned by this channel, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he would not rule out applying lockdowns again in the future. Obviously, to vow never to lock down again would be a tacit admission by him that they were the wrong move all along, and no modern, self-preserving Prime Minister would ever be so honest. But there we are, the lockdowns that did so much needless damage, caused so much unforgivable harm, remain on the table. There will inevitably be those that say children are resilient, and so they are, thank goodness. But just because children are resilient doesn't mean we should stress test them to destruction. And make no mistake, some of the ground lost already will never be recovered by many. Our debt to them will always remain unpaid. Children now are growing up in a world very different to the one most of us remember. To take but one example, online, on social media, are images, videos and posts all pushing the same message, that changing your gender is the cure for all manner of problems. Crowdfunders raise money to help children bypass the NHS and obtain puberty-blocking drugs from private sources, and to pay for private operations to remove breasts or to construct them, or to reshape genitals, or to remove internal anatomy, including wombs. No one can honestly claim to know the long-term consequences of taking such steps. This is another epidemic. Between 2014 and 2015, there were around 700 referrals each year to the Gender Identity Service at London's Tavistock Clinic. That number rose to around 2,600 each year between 2019 and 2020. That more and more children are unhappy at the existential level and reporting feeling uncomfortable with the sexual identity they were born with is undeniable and poses all manner of questions in urgent need of answers. It's almost as though gender dysphoria had mutated to become as airborne as COVID ever was. There's also, anyway, a growing preoccupation with the sexuality of children, all children. In Scotland and Wales, government surveys ask children as young as 13 about their sex lives, inquiring about what age they were when they first had sex, how long it has been since they last had sex. Those are not even the most intrusive or intimate of the questions in those surveys. If I had been asked questions like those by relative strangers when I was 13, my explicit instructions from my parents were to run for home. The incessant, relentless push to spend more and more time talking to children about sex and gender means I personally find it hard not to conclude that we are, as a society, being increasingly familiarised with the thought of sexually active children. Why would that be? To what end? For whose benefit? Certainly not necessarily the benefit of children who are anyway below the legal age of consent. Life is short. Childhood is shorter still. And judging by what schools and other manifestations of officialdom want to talk to them about, have them think about, getting shorter every day. Psychologists have known for years that children must be socialised by the age of 4. If they've not become by then children able to take up their place in society through mixing and playing with their peers and being supervised by responsible adults whose faces they can see, whose mouths they can watch forming words, and all the rest of it, then at the most fundamental level they never will. More and more it feels like the needs of children are being set aside and overlooked, sacrificed to ensure the well-being, comfort or objectives of their elders. Childhood itself is under attack, sullied by earlier and earlier confrontation with and initiation into the ways of adults. During the time of COVID, the needs of children were put last, education compromised or abandoned altogether, play reduced to an afterthought, contact with family and friends forbidden. We could argue all day about the threat posed to children by the vaccines. Undeniable harm, however, has been done by 2 years of the mass psychosis of their elders. More has been taken from children than might ever be measured. That debt will never be repaid. All of that's my opinion, of course, and you're free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming all through the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews, and I'll try to get to some of your comments later in the show. And here is my amazing panel, already introduced briefly. Benjamin Loughnane, Research Fellow at Bow Group, and author and commentator Laura Dodsworth. Hello both.
Hello.
It's lovely to have you here again. You're both familiar faces to me, at least. Laura, come to you first. Can the ground lost by those children be made up, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not an educational psychologist. I'm not the expert on this, but I thought you made a really good point about resilience. I'm fed up of being told that children are resilient. That Ofsted report was heartbreaking. Actually, it was enraging, and I've got almost no words for how I feel about it. This whole experience of trying to speak up for the impact on children from the beginning of lockdown has been like watching a slow lorry crash happen. And it's still happening. I'd say the lorries haven't even collided. We're just at the beginning of watching the ricochet and the impact. And and the full horror. Really terrible things about young children, that they're behind on crawling, understanding facial expressions, behind on language development. You mentioned they're talking in cartoon voices because of time on screens. Now, I've heard some talk about how this is parents' fault, that, they weren't parenting effectively. I'm a single parent, and let me tell you that parenting your children effectively when they're supposed to be learning on a screen and you're also working and managing in this crazy, chaotic and stressful time is too much. It's too much. No parent's responsible for the consequences upon their children. I mean, even last summer, there were reports that children in the US were speaking in British accents because they were watching so much Peppa Pig. So we've seen the problems happening piece by piece, and it's only now that people can acknowledge the full impact. I think that one group that hasn't been talked about enough is teenagers. So the Ofsted report also talked about the fact that teenagers are taking less ambitious GCSEs. So there are fewer kids doing triple science, English baccalaureate, history, and the more challenging academic subjects. So I know from talking to teachers, they've said that most children, most GCSE pupils are behind. And not only that, I've got teenage boys, and I can tell you that when they went back to school following the first lockdown, the schools were feral. This isn't the children's fault, it's not the school's fault. They were in this completely unnatural experiment. And when they went back to school, it's like they didn't know how to be. There were fights everywhere. The kids came back telling me about all the fights in school. They've been through the most peculiar and terrible time, and they shouldn't actually have to be resilient. They should never have been sacrificed. We know that they were less affected by the virus. They weren't super spreaders. Schools were not dangerous places to be. The bar to shut schools should have been so high. They shouldn't have been shut for a coronavirus. So I'm outraged. I'm really upset. And seeing the impact on my own children has been terrible. And it goes beyond just education as well. I was reading about some of the fixed penalty notices that have been applied. And this is particularly relevant now as we see that people in Downing Street are getting their £50 fines or whatever. And there was a teenager who was caught in a car with a few other lads his own age eating a takeaway Nando's. And they were from separate households, and so they were fined. And, they may face criminal records for this too. And what he wrote in mitigation was that he was deeply ashamed and that he'd gone for a Nando's to deal with the extreme stress of his long shifts at Co-op.
And he was ashamed.
As a country, we completely lost our moral grip because we imposed fines like that, the worst fines our country's seen since the Dark Ages on teenagers going for a Nando's. And they were the worst fines since the Dark Ages because I went back historically to check.
Benjamin, listening to all of that from Laura, do you think we'll see any kind of accountability? And perhaps more importantly, do you think that any lessons have been learned? Because I was shocked, frankly, to hear the Prime Minister say that lockdowns were still on the table.
I don't think he was necessarily saying they were still on the table. It was that he can't admit that they were wrong in the first place. So he can't say we're going to take them off the table because that would be conceding the point that it should never have happened. But we all know it should never have happened. We all know it was a disastrous policy decision. So we're at a point now where he's pretending that we don't know that he knows what we know. And it's all a bit of a charade. But getting back to the point of the resilience, I think that's the main point, this idea of children are resilient, they can put up with it. We're asking children to put up with all this huge amount of suffering, long-term suffering, which will affect the rest of their lives, for effectively the elderly and vulnerable. So a smaller part of the population as well. And we are putting all of that pressure on young people who are going to have to live with that forever. When you talk to any psychologists, they'll say that most issues that adults carry on into adulthood come from childhood. It's always those early years which form some of the deepest scars which affect people's life forever. So we are going to see, in the long term, I think, a generation of people extremely damaged from the past 2 years. And we have a Prime Minister who can't even admit the fact that he might have got it wrong. He can't even say, look, at the time, with the evidence that we had, we made the decision, the best decision we possibly could, but on reflection, we may have got it wrong. We can't even do that.
Can I chime in on that? Because I think that you're absolutely right. I don't think lockdowns truly are on the table again, because if they were, all that would be left would be to salt the earth. Yeah. I mean, it would be an absolute disaster. Yeah. I hope I haven't got Stockholm syndrome, but by this stage, if Boris Johnson admitted that lockdown was a mistake and we'll never do it again, I think I could forgive him almost anything. Imagine the respect we'd have for leaders with the courage to admit they made a mistake.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I get people message me and tweet me to say, you know, because of my book, State of Fear, they'll say, do you think we could lock down again? They are petrified. So hanging that over people's heads saying, well, you know, we can't rule out lockdowns in case there's another variant, that's not fair to do that to people. If he thinks it was a mistake, having the courage to own up to it and promise it would never happen again would allay the fears of millions of people.
I think so. Joining our conversation is Tony Breslin, author of the book Lessons from Lockdown. Good evening, Tony. Thank you for joining us. Tony, obviously the effects were not uniform, far from it. We all heard the stories of those who claimed or were deemed to have thrived during the lockdown for whatever reason. What would you say, having looked at the data in the way that you have, what would you say are the wider lessons that ought to be learned from this Ofsted report, perhaps?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I welcome, I mean, nobody wants to welcome the news in it, but one of the reasons why I welcome this report is that Ofsted is at last acknowledging, and the education system is acknowledging, teachers have known this from the beginning, but at a system level, that actually the profound impact here is not actually about where children are with fractions or even with literacy. That's really important, but it's about the role of schools in their social development. And what we have seen, you know, I am more concerned about how a 6-year-old catches up on a year's missed play dates than on how she catches up on fractions. I am more worried about how a 14-year-old catches up in a year not jostling in the corridor in the way that drove me mad when I was teaching. Right? So I think we need. I welcome the fact that we're now putting the social stuff on the table. I think actually children have done much better educationally than has widely been suspected, and they are catching up broadly much quicker. But of course, we know the hardest impact always falls on the most disadvantaged. But just one thing I do want to say, and this is a real caution, I don't recognise this as being about a generation of children. This is about some of the children in this generation. And if we start talking about a generation of children, what we'll actually do is damage them by that label. So what we do need to acknowledge is that no two schools, no two children, no two families have had the same lockdown. And that actually what we really need to do now is to research that experience. Look, I don't think any of us can sit here and say it was the wrong thing, it was the right thing. I'm no defender of government, but, you know, this was an entirely novel situation. We are where we are, and that's where we must move forward from. But what I would like to see is real longitudinal research that tracks, you know, families, children, teachers over the next 5-10 years. I do think, and I have said in the book, that I initially thought there were 3 groups of people in this, right? Lockdown strugglers, lockdown survivors, and lockdown thrivers. I came to the conclusion that that was an error. It was an error because actually there weren't 3 groups of people. They were 3 sort of conditions that at different points we all have passed through over the last 2 years. There are points and aspects of this that have enabled some of us to thrive at certain things. There are periods where some of us have struggled. Some of us have struggled far more than others. That's why we mustn't talk about a generation, but get down to the detail. And most of us, most of the time, thankfully, have survived, and we have drawn on our resilience. You're absolutely right. We shouldn't go stress testing children about this. But you know what? Children are a product of their experience. There will be stuff that we can't kind of pay back, as it were, from this. But there may also be gains that this group of children have that actually might put some of them in very good stead. Let me give you one example, Neil. One of the things that upper primary school teachers often said in my research was that their year 5 and year 6 children were becoming better at being independent learners. However, teachers at the bottom of secondary and secondary school leaders said to me, children were more childish. You can have both of those at the same time. So the children missed out on the social. In the words of one head teacher who spoke to me, they kind of forgot how to play. I don't recognise what Laura says about schools. We've got two teenage boys in school. I don't recognise that, but I do recognise that, you know, children have missed out on social development massively. And in all the aims to curriculum catch up, we may have missed that.
What concerns me is that we're moving on without any acknowledgement of damage done. You know, to the extent that the Prime Minister is still saying that the same tactic, the same idea that has been so roundly criticised in this report and the mistakes admitted to, he still won't, and no one around him will admit the mistake. I agree that the last thing you would want to do is stigmatise a group of people as though they're in some way, you know, disadvantaged for life. But the fact remains there surely ought to be a period of people in authority admitting they got it wrong. And as well as I acknowledge, I'm all with you that we have to move forward. But surely it's also too early to move so swiftly on from an Ofsted report that acknowledges that babies, toddlers and the youngest children are struggling to crawl, walk, talk, read facial expressions and all of the rest of it. These are profound ways in which these children have been challenged, to say the least. And surely it's too early to just say, oh, well, and move on without somebody having to hold their hand up and say, that was me.
Yeah, look, I'm less interested in people holding their hands up because I'm not sure where it takes us, right? I do take the point about a bit more honesty from politicians across the range would really help. But I do think that what we have to acknowledge is that this is a challenge that will be different for every child and every family, and we have to get down to the bespoke difference. And one of the things that has contributed over the last 12 months, rather than the first 12 months, I feel, to some of the pressure children feel under, is on the one hand, people are telling them they're a lost generation. And on the other hand, they've been told to catch up and catch up and catch up. And actually, that's just not what they need at the moment. What they need is support to be the young people we want them to be and they want to be. And that means a much stronger focus on the social well-being of children, reintegrating children and so forth. But this group of children will carry, of course they'll carry a very different childhood forward with them. But I don't doubt, just as previous challenged generations, I don't doubt they'll carry that trauma. I've done a lot of work myself in terms of trauma-related education and what have you. I don't doubt they'll carry that trauma, but I don't doubt also that they will carry strengths. And, you know, when we're seeing what the children in the Ukraine are going through, we really have to ask, was a bit more time than we would ever want, but a bit of time at home such a disaster? We start where we are, we work with the young children, the young people as they are. But actually, remember, if we say, let's get back to normal, the problem about let's get back to normal is the education system wasn't perfect beforehand. The children that are at the bottom now were at the bottom then. Now, they may be worse off and they may have a bigger challenge. But to kind of pretend that actually what they've missed out on is a perfectly functioning education system that works for every child is itself a fantasy. So let's look forward to the future. Let's rebuild for it, and let's not hark for a past that wasn't quite as golden as sometimes we'd all like it to be.
Tony Breslin, I like your optimism. I don't know if I share it. Tony Breslin, the author of Lessons from Lockdown. You're undoubtedly right that we have to build forward from here. I just don't like where we are here. After the break, we'll be discussing cryptocurrency. Is it the future of transactions?
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. Now, obviously, that conversation from before the break has, well, it's got arms and legs, hasn't it? And it's a long way from being concluded. Laura was particularly incensed during some of the testimony from our author, Tony Breslin, and I feel that, Laura, there was something particular that you wanted to reply with, having heard Tony there.
I also liked his optimism. I definitely take on board his point that we shouldn't describe a lost generation because that is a label which is counterproductive. Labelling people can be self-fulfilling. However, I feel like his view was a little bit rose-tinted. So he says, you know, was it any great loss that kids had more time at home? Well, what about the rise in head injuries on babies? The rise in addictions? I was talking to a teacher at a school recently who told me that while they used to offer help for addictions, you know, smoking or other drugs, they can now offer no help for addictions because too many teenagers have addictions to be helped through the school system. Some children were not safe at home. That's not their safe place, and yet they were stuck there, and school was their safe place. So, you know, it may be that he has had a more positive experience of lockdown, which colorises his view. But for some people, being at home wasn't safe. It wasn't making soda bread, forest schooling, and drinking Chablis under the wisteria. It was a nightmare.
Benjamin, my concern, amongst many, is that the people who will be tasked or offered the opportunity to assess the recovery of these children are the same people in many instances who were so complicit in what happened. Yeah. And I will be sceptical when we start hearing that, oh, it's all been fine and all the previously stated concerns about the predicament have been overblown.
Yeah, I think they'll go into it with a foregone conclusion. They'll be looking only for the positives, drawing out every possible potential positive consequence of those lockdowns. But I think you can find a positive in anything if you look for it. If you're looking only for something good, you see the Titanic going down and you can say, oh, well, the lobsters in the kitchen must be really happy because now they've been saved and they can swim away. And won't it make a lovely, you know, submarine, biggest submarine in the world? If you have the mentality of finding a positive, even the most unmitigated disaster possible, you know, you'd see the Hindenburg disaster and say, oh, it's like fireworks. You know, if you go into it with that attitude, you're always going to find a positive.
It's a conversation that could go on at some considerable length, but we must move on. Now, to change the topic, Bitcoin is a word more and more people have heard, whether or not they understand what a Bitcoin actually is. Likewise, cryptocurrency, there's a good word. More and more of us are aware of the existence of virtual money, digital money that may be traded and used for transactions, but that has no physical form. A single Bitcoin, one of hundreds of cryptocurrencies circulating in the virtual world now, is presently valued at, I think, between £32,000, £34,000 for a single Bitcoin. Governments are paying more and more attention to cryptocurrencies. The British Treasury is not alone in seeking to develop its own digital currency and to find ways of regulating others already in existence. One way or another, it seems cryptocurrencies are here to stay. Now, here to consider the implications of it all are futurologist Tracy Follows, who joins us in the studio, and author and crypto expert Dominic Frisby. Hello both, thank you for joining me.
Hi Neil.
Hi there. Dominic, I'll come to you first perhaps.
Good stuff.
What defines a cryptocurrency? I always have to bear in mind that many people out there are still mostly unaware of the evolution that's happening around them.
Well, there's all sorts of cryptocurrencies, and they're all currencies that are designed by computer coders, basically, to be used on the internet. It's money for the internet, basically. And Bitcoin specifically is cash for the internet. You were talking at great length there about the abuses of power by government, and in this case, locking down and on our schools and on children and so on. The great beauty of Bitcoin, and there's a great saying among Bitcoiners, which is Bitcoin fixes this. And all the abuses that you just described, that is one of the many things that Bitcoin fixes, because the disproportionate power that government has in society today, which is, you just think how big the state is and how disproportionately large it is. The reason that it has been able to grow so large and powerful and intrusive and invasive and all those things is because it has the power to print money. And when one body in a society has the power to create money at no cost to itself, and no one else has that power, that body inevitably will grow too large. And the larger it grows, the more abusive it becomes. And the beauty of Bitcoin is that here is an independent, open source system of money that no single body has the power to print, but at the same time, everybody has the power to print, or I should say, to mine it by using their computers to mine it. And in mining Bitcoin, in creating Bitcoin, what you're actually doing is maintaining the network. It's one of the most beautifully designed technical bits of code ever.
Tracy, that's a very exciting and inspirational account of a cryptocurrency, Bitcoin specifically. Do you share that? Do you share that feeling that it offers so much as a way to counter the power of the state?
Yes, definitely. I think, and it depends what country you're in as well, because a lot of people have invested in Bitcoin as a speculative asset, not just a currency, but also as a hedge against things like inflation. And of course, that is on our mind every day at the moment, with energy costs and the cost of living increasing so dramatically. So a lot of people are using it as a hedge, and they like to feel that they're part of a decentralised system where there is no central control, nobody can censor them, no one can take it away, nobody can alter the money or the supply like a central authority. And I think that is, as Dominic says, that's part of the attraction.
Dominic, listening to you both, it does sound like almost a universal panacea for financial ills. Does this explain why the government and others around our government and others around the world are, well, as it were, sticking their noses into crypto? Is it because of its inherent threat to their power base?
Oh, they don't get it, Neil. They just totally don't get it. They don't even understand their own currency and how that's created. If you want to look at how utterly incompetent our government is, you only need to look at, and more than incompetent, inconsistent. You only look at its policy towards cryptocurrencies on the very same day that Rishi Sunak is trying to save his reputation by going, oh, we're turning London into a hub and we're going to make an NFT and we're going to develop this, which George Osborne was doing 5 years ago, by the way. On the very same day, Andrew Bailey from the Bank of England is describing them as a threat. Andrew Bailey hates them. The FCA makes it so difficult for ordinary citizens to buy Bitcoin with its intrusive policies. It's banned all sorts of crypto derivatives to the ordinary investor. It closed down all the ATMs. And on the one hand, Rishi Sunak's saying this, and on the other, another department is just doing something totally different. It's insane, but it's totally exemplary of the inconsistencies at the heart of government.
Tracy, this is fascinating to me, practically and I suppose even philosophically. Is it clearly government is interested? Government's competently or incompetently, as Dominic suggests, or not, they're trying to get into that arena.
is it feasible that a government, any government, could take control of Bitcoin? Because I keep reading that it's unhackable, untouchable, that the code is so effective that it will always be beyond the reach of politicians.
Yeah, I personally think it is beyond the reach of politicians, but what isn't beyond the reach of politicians are other cryptocurrencies. So one of the interesting things that Rishi Sunak did say, or rather John Glenn, the Executive Secretary to the Treasury, said on Monday, during FinTech Week, of course, was that they wanted to bring in stable coins into the economic system, really. So these are the privately backed cryptocurrencies that are pegged to a fiat currency. So they might be pegged to the dollar, for example, and it gives them much more stability as a cryptocurrency so that you can use them in more daily, everyday transactions of more nominal value. Well, this is very interesting to me because I think this is the government trying to bring in stable coins, but also to watch what happens in the environment and then perhaps move towards their own central bank digital currency. But it was an interesting move. Whether or not they're competent to do that, they definitely sort of made a gesture to welcome in stable coins.
Dominic, I see you're watching your time there, so I know that you've got somewhere else that you have to be, so I'm very grateful for your time, but I would come back
I'm on
to you.
stage in 15 minutes, Neil.
Off the back of what Tracy was saying there, do you see that? I heard you praise the nature of the code that is cryptocurrency, that is Bitcoin. Do you remain confident that this is a portal, an opportunity, a life raft for free people to get beyond and stay beyond the reach of meddling states?
100%. It is the greatest technical evolution in the defence of liberty in the history of probably the last 200 years. What governments can do is they can make it illegal. But the irony of making it illegal, in all the countries where they've made it illegal, Bitcoin usage has actually increased. So that doesn't work. But you will see governments and central banks and the Bank of England and so on doing their own national currencies on a blockchain. So you'll have so-called CBDCs, and these are very, very dangerous. Programmable money that you could program it in. I don't know. Have you had the vaccine? Okay, you can have the UBI. Have you not had the vaccine? Okay, you can't have the UBI. Are you buying? What are you trying to buy? You're allowed to buy that with this money. No, you can't buy that with this money. It gives government control over your money. It's very, very dangerous. We're going down that route, I'm afraid, but Bitcoin is the life raft, as you say.
It's fantastic stuff. This is why I'm drawn to this. It's one of those Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is one of those concepts that, as long as experts are speaking to me about it, I can hold it. But as soon as you move away from me and stop telling me how it works, I start to lose control. I start to lose control of what cryptocurrency is.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes.
It doesn't matter if you don't understand how it works. You drive a car, I bet you don't know how a combustion engine works. You use ordinary money, I bet you don't know how that works. You use the internet, I bet you don't know how hypertext transfer protocol works. You don't need to understand how it works to use it. I'm going to sign out, Neil, because I've got to run on stage. Thank you very much for having me.
You do that, Dominic. Thank you very much for those exciting insights. Tracy, we can all look at one another now. We don't need to look down cameras at the moment. What also interests me, if this is decentralising money, if that's the right word, wealth, whatever, if it's decentralising money, can the underlying technology or principle of cryptocurrency be used to decentralise other things online? Could it get content away from the tech oligarchs and put it back into the hands of the people where it was supposed to be?
It's a very, very interesting question, because what is at the core of all of this is cryptographic technology, and you can use cryptographic technology anywhere. You know, you can share secrets but not share the key. There's a private key and a public key, and when they match, you can open or access a wallet, for example. Now, this is obviously run on the blockchain, which is a database, a decentralised or distributed ledger. That could take any content. You could basically store anything or record anything of value. So, say you create some content, or you've got media content. It could be a tweet, not on Twitter, but it could be a tweet. You could store that. It's immutable. It's an interaction, not a transaction, but it's recorded forever. Nobody can change it. You can't go back.
You can't censor it. No one can decide you're not saying that on there.
Yeah, so there's a very interesting company called DSO.org, which I think used to be Clout. And what they're doing is trying to build a social media network on the blockchain, or a blockchain. I think it's pretty successful so far. And what they're really promising is, when I tweet something, I don't own that tweet. Twitter own that tweet. Well, in this system, I would own that tweet. If I got a load of likes, maybe I'd get a token or some kind of reward instead of just a like. And essentially, all of the monetization of that content would come back to me, or some of it would come back to me, whereas, of course, none of it comes back to me. It goes into the pocket of a private enterprise.
Benjamin, how does this affect your thinking? Are you on board with cryptocurrency, or at the very least, do you agree with what you're being told, that it offers a new way of looking after that which we value online?
Yeah, well, I'm yet to be converted to the Bitcoin revolution. I think it might be a bit of a distraction technique. If you look at what all the richest people are doing at the moment, they're buying up vast tracts of land. Bill Gates is just buying up acres upon acres of land. He's not investing in, NFTs and cryptocurrencies. I think it's one of those things where assets are always the safest place to keep your money. Tangible things that you can actually see, touch, feel, produce things with. You can monetize those assets. You can create wealth out of them. If you have a farm, you can put seeds in the ground and grow things and sell it. There's a very clear way that creates wealth. With all of these cryptocurrencies and NFTs and all this move online, perhaps I'm just behind the times, perhaps I just don't understand it, but I'm not sold on it. I don't see where the money comes from. I don't see where the wealth is created.
Well, Laura,
but what you're saying applies in the same way as well to cash or to cheques. They're all just promises to pay. Yeah. I really like what Tracy's saying about blockchain. You see, I'm not opposed to digital ID or digital currency at all. I just don't want the state to programme it. So the idea that we've got private keys to our own identity, to be able to monetise our own content, to make peer-to-peer transactions, I love that. Obviously, the state has a role in monitoring financial transactions because of taxation, but I don't want it to programme transactions. Dominic was talking about the dangers of CBDC. An identity-based central bank digital currency is frightening. Now, they've done it in China, and there's a saying there, once blacklisted, forever restricted. So let's say you don't pay a fine on time, or you break the law, or you've been accused of gossiping too much in your local neighbourhood. You may not be able to buy train tickets or to fly. This is actually happening. They've been trialling this for a decade in China.
One last thing for you, Tracy. Yes. Do you think that aspect of programmable CBDCs would see the light of day here? Or do you think we would fight against it as a society?
I think we'll fight against it. The promise of it is that it goes direct. You get rid of all the banks, the central bank goes direct to the consumer or to the business. The danger, of course, is because it's programmable, it can be confiscatory. So if you don't carry out certain behaviours, perhaps your money could be confiscated. It will come into use, though, I think. If there were another pandemic, there'd be a CBDC that delivered stimulus packages directly to people and directly to businesses. And that's one thing to watch out for the future, I think.
I'd have to wonder for whose benefit they were designed.
Exactly.
Us or them.
Yes.
Cryptocurrency is something that I could talk about endlessly. It captures my imagination. However, it's a break coming up, after which we'll be talking about how it's been an incredibly difficult 2 years, and we'll discuss mindfulness with meditation and mental health coach Brenda Shanky. All that coming up.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss, and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. Tonight we're talking about the pressure brought to bear on all of us by the past 2 years of lockdown and the rest, and a future made uncertain by a cost of living crisis, of course, and most recently war in Ukraine. Tough times for many. My next guest has had her own experience of reaching the end of her tether. In the aftermath, she took a look at her life, one that would have been the envy of many, and decided on wholesale change. She's Brenda Shanky. Been through your own struggles, Brenda, fought your own demons. Brenda now works as a mindfulness coach, helping others to change their thinking and cope more successfully with life's challenges. Thanks for joining me.
You're welcome.
It's really good because we often talk in the general, and you're an individual who has something very specific in terms of a personal experience. I read about you, and your life has something of the feel of before and after.
Yeah.
Tell me about before, what you were doing and what your life was like.
Before, well, I kind of reached a stage, I guess, where I had it all. In society's terms, I was very successful. Businesswoman of the Year. I had 5 businesses and 4 in Northern Ireland and 1 in London. I'm from Belfast originally. 2 kids. £1 million house. I had a celebrity clientele, hairdresser to the stars. I'd made my own TV show, and money was not a problem. And life to the outside world was amazing.
So what happened? What was the fork in the road or the brick wall that you hit?
Well, medically, I took a mental breakdown. Burnout, mental breakdown, crash. And basically, mentally, inside of myself, to the outside world, I had all these masks and I was always smiling and life was wonderful. But inside, something was missing, and I was living off very high anxiety. I was very depressed. Nothing was good enough. I was sad, and I'm thinking, but I have the Porsche and the £1 million house and the holidays, and why am I not happy? Mm-hmm. And I kept working harder. I became a workaholic. I lived life at both ends of the scale, and I burnt myself into exhaustion, and I collapsed.
And how did you go about getting back onto an even keel? Was that something you did for yourself?
The first thing I did was, I'll never forget lying in the hospital bed, and a friend said to me at the time, "Where do you go from here?" And I was in my 30s, and I thought, well, what is it all about? Where do I go from here? What is this life thing? And to be honest, I followed the medical route at the time. I was on antidepressants, and I took some time off work. The antidepressants didn't seem to do anything miraculous. I was waiting for this happiness from this Prozac pill. Mm-hmm. So I started to research. I put in two names into Google, 2 things. I wanted peace and happiness. That was the 2 words I typed into Google. And for some strange reason, the word meditation kept coming up. And I thought, I'm not a hippie.
Because these are meditation and also mindfulness are words that many people are suspicious of.
Oh, yeah.
So tell me what they mean to, what they have come to mean to you.
To me, meditation and mindfulness actually mean peace in here and peace in here and being happy with me and actually creating that life that I want all by myself with no stress. And
how is it that you go about, because you now help others.
Yeah.
So can you sort of summarise or give me a quick sense of what it is that you teach people or that you encourage people to do?
I think the main thing is I teach people how to understand themselves, how to understand how they think and how they feel and how to deal with their thoughts and their emotions, because it's something we're never taught. When I had my breakdown, I didn't know how to cope with me. I didn't know how to stop my thoughts if they were intrusive or dangerous or harmful to me. And I didn't know that I had the power over my emotional response in my body and actually over my mind. And I just thought children and teenagers need to know this information. And people from young should know how the mind works and the body works and that emotional response to being a human.
And you do offer courses and help for children as young as 5, is that right?
Yeah, I went to a university in Glasgow and I studied in children's mindfulness because the brain before the age of 12, if we get the information in on the emotions and how to cope, then we will have teenagers who can cope with anxiety and stress and pressure and grief and whatever it is without needing medication or...
I like this idea. Mindfulness is I don't know, is necessarily a helpful word, but I like the idea that you have that each person, each individual can take control of their own mind and their own emotions.
Yes.
That is within our grasp.
We're all different. We're all individuals. You know, we're not robots. But the secret and what I teach and what I do is I get you to understand you and you work it all out. That's the power. And you're the only one who knows how you feel. And I teach you what the mind is about and all the processes of the mind. And then you can overcome anything. And then you create that life that you want.
Brenda, I could talk to you for much longer. Thank you, Brenda Shanky, meditation, mindfulness and performance coach. Another break, and after that, the effects of the last 2 years will be discussed in the context of globalization. Is it here to stay or on its way out?
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word CRISIS to 70 150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. You're watching GB News and I'm Neil Oliver. Coming up this hour, we'll be discussing whether globalization is on its way out. What would the effects on charities be in a cashless society? There's another question that's connected to much else we've been discussing so far. And it's that time of year, spring cleaning. We'll delve into the psychology behind it. But first, it's the news headlines.
Thanks, Neil. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. Boris Johnson has pledged economic and defensive military support to Ukraine following talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. The Prime Minister said he made his surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital as a show of our unwavering support for the people of Ukraine. Britain has agreed to send 120 armoured vehicles and new anti-ship missile systems to support the country against Russia's aggression. Boris Johnson says with allies, the UK is going to ratchet up economic pressure and continue to intensify sanctions on Russia.
Together with friends and partners, we, the UK and others, supply the equipment, the technology, the know-how, the intelligence, so that Ukraine will never be invaded again.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials have urged civilians in the eastern region of Luhansk to flee as Russia is amassing new forces. The governor there warned that Russia is preparing a new offensive as shelling increased in recent days. Ukraine has been warning that Russia plans intensified attacks in the country's east and south after withdrawing its troops from areas to the north of Kyiv. President Zelensky said the country was preparing for a tough battle ahead. The royal family has released a poetic tribute to mark the first anniversary of the Duke of Edinburgh's death. The poem, written by poet laureate Simon Armitage, is called The Patriarchs, an elegy. Prince Philip died on this day last year at Windsor Castle, just months short of his 100th birthday.
Husbands to duty, they unrolled their plans across billiard tables and vehicle bonnets, regrouped at breakfast. What their secrets were was everyone's guess and nobody's business. Great-grandfathers from birth, in time they became both inner core and outer case in a family heirloom of nesting dolls.
And bookmakers were relieved to see Noble Yates gallop to the first place at this year's Grand National. The 7-year-old horse won against the odds at 50-1. Trained by Emmett Mullins, it beat 15-2 favourite Any Second Now to Pip the Post, saving bookies from a significant payout. Delta Work was third. Noble Yates was ridden by amateur Sam Whaley-Cohen on his last ever ride, describing his win as a fairy tale. On TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Neil Oliver.
Thank you for all of that. Now, we have lived in a world made smaller by easier travel and also by the wonder of the internet, of course. A world in which the end of the Cold War and the rise of new economies developing like a rash spread all over the globe made all of our lives increasingly open to and dependent upon events in far-off places. And then came COVID, a colossal spanner in the works, you would say, imperiling or breaking long-distance supply chains. The word that summarises the interconnected nature of world trade is globalization. The question now is whether globalization has had its day and whether nation-states will, in future, look to make sure the things their people need are made and grown closer to home. And in the months ahead, will the situation become even more perilous because of ongoing war in Ukraine? Now, to discuss this, it's really a kind of a bottomless topic, isn't it? Globalisation, it's everything. I'm going to turn to my panel, research fellow at the Bow Group, Benjamin Loughnane, and author and commentator Laura Dodsworth, who're still with me. Benjamin, would you say, have we seen peak globalisation?
I think, the hopeful days of the past century where everyone were moving ever closer together, trading more and more with each other, that sort of hope has gone. People now realise that with global trade, with global unity, also comes things like global war and global suffering. And when you have something like, China have an illness, it spreads across the world, and then all of their reaction to it spreads as well. And so we have these lockdowns, which are effectively sort of mimetic. We're just copying what the previous people did, and you get this domino effect. Governments no longer really want to govern on their own. They don't want to make decisions. They just copy what everyone else is doing. Everything is done by international accord. Nothing is done by governments actually governing on behalf of the people. The problem with this is when you have a system democratically where people can elect certain people to make decisions, but those people aren't actually making those decisions, you get the breakdown in democratic accountability. You can't remove the people who are actually making the decisions because the people who are implementing them are just effectively bureaucrats. They're just clerks, low-level clerks, implementing decisions that have been made on a higher level. One of the things that I think really impressed us recently was with Rishi Sunak, all of this debacle about him holding a green card and his wife being non-domiciled and paying tax elsewhere. Well, the thing is, when you have a class of people who are internationalists, they don't have any nation. They are part of many nations, and they are born in one place, educated in another, and then they go and form governments in other countries. They are this international class of citizen, and you see this quite often. You go to any sort of Hilton hotel across the world or any of these chains in any city, and things are exactly the same there. The city might be completely different outside, but people go from these places to place to place to place, and everything is the same in that ring, and it's all the same people who occupy these same sort of almost embassies of globalism in every country. And you look at, with Rishi Sunak in particular, this idea of, isn't it an outrage that he's an American, he's got a green card? Well, for him it's not, because to him, he's just, he governs in this country, he holidays in another country, his children will go to university there. The international citizenship, this globalised class, is, completely separate from the national interest. The idea of a government governing in the national interest is ridiculous now because they're not interested in nationhood. They're not interested in nationality or identity. David Goodhart had this idea of somewheres and anywheres. Some people are somewheres. They have a home, they have a nationhood, they have an identity. They care deeply about that, and they vote according to that national interest, their group. And then there's the anywheres, the people who can go anywhere and they don't really have any attachment. They're very atomised, and they're only comfortable around other people who are also anywheres. As soon as they see something that's national or local, they sort of shrivel up a bit.
Where are you in that? What side of that seesaw are you on, Laura? Are you a somewhere with a sense of place and an allegiance to a place, or would you see yourself as an
I'm not a global elite. I'm not an anywhere person, I'm afraid. I've got to tell you, I'm a normal somewhere person. Do you know what? I love this country. I love the land. I love the people. I'm a somewhere person. I'm a Britain person. I'm actually quite patriotic, which might surprise some people with the book I just wrote criticising the government. I love this place. You also get anywhere places. Increasingly London feels a bit like that. You could go from city to city, certain global cities, and they all feel the same. I think that's quite sad. I saw a big skyscraper going up literally spitting distance from a beautiful Georgian house in London yesterday. I thought, this is a shame, But most of this country isn't like that. Most of this country is still a somewhere place. So, like you said at the beginning, this is a huge conversation. When we talk about globalisation, I want to just narrow back down on one thing that strikes me when we talk about globalisation. Think about the disapproval that was heaped upon Sweden for not following the fall of dominoes, as the whole world seemed to act in a kind of eerie synchronicity, copying each other in appalling pandemic management policy. So Sweden stayed on its own and, was really put on the naughty step for that, and earned condemnation in the world's media, and of course has turned out to do quite well. I don't think it's the end of globalisation in some ways, what a pity. Look at the World Health Organization trying to ratify a treaty where sovereign states would have to follow what the World Health Organization says countries should do in the situation of any future pandemic, even influenza. The idea that as a sovereign state you would follow public health bureaucrats, when really it should be the people and the government accountable to each other. That's where we invest our authority. Someplace people, we haven't invested our authority in the World Health Organization. Indeed. So that I'd like to see, just as this country voted to leave Europe, there's probably other organisations we should think about our relationship with in those terms, so that we do have sovereignty, accountability.
Yeah. One of the problems, I in so many things, can't think what to do for the best. I see the problems with globalisation because they've been laid bare, and I too am a somewhere person, and I too am patriotic about Britain, very much so, and I feel a sense of identity drawn from the place. But if it's not to be global decisions, I felt, say for example, during lockdown, that we saw our government make one botched decision after another. So that if our own bureaucrats and elected representatives had to take the place of whoever were making the global decisions, I can't say that I'm confident that they any longer have the necessary skills of the necessary craft to effectively look after this place on behalf of all the somewheres.
Well, it's like that poem by Gaddafi about the barbarians in the marketplace, the leaders in the marketplace waiting for the barbarians to come. And there's stanza after stanza, there's no instrument of government taking place, there's no trading, nothing's going on because we're waiting for the barbarians to come. And then the last stanza is, there's a lot of disappointment because the barbarians didn't come, but those people were some kind of solution. So there's a sense of inertia. People don't want to govern because they feel that there's this global order. If they're elected, it doesn't really matter. They'll just copy whatever the consensus is. They're in lockstep with these sort of global institutions, NATO, the UN, the EU, and so on and so forth. The World Health Organization is another. And at a time like now, when we're hell-bent on running headlong into a global war with NATO on the basis of what's going on in Ukraine, I do think that it might be time to stop and pause and say, is this in Britain's interests? Well, our government don't care if it's in Britain's interests. It's about a greater global idea. So this Ukraine situation is a proxy war, effectively, between East and West. It is emblematic of a tension that is happening in a global sense. It is not about Ukraine and Russia. It is about us v them. It is about this global identity. And the other day I was in Whitehall and I saw over number 10 and over a number of government buildings the NATO flag being flown. And I think that really sums it up. We no longer have the Union Jack flying from the government buildings, we have NATO.
That's deeply uncomfortable, I think, seeing a NATO flag flying above a government building.
Indeed. They said it was for the 73rd anniversary of NATO, but
Oh, OK. If it's a one-day birthday thing. There's something interesting about the Ukraine, you see. Understandably, the Ukraine doesn't want to be invaded and they want their freedom back. But a way in which, if we're going to call it a proxy war, and I don't think I've got the geopolitical knowledge to know if that's correct or not, but if it is, one thing that's being leveraged is the nationalistic identity of Ukraine. And we're supposed to support this. And yet we're not very comfortable about being nationalistic in this country. Indeed. And there's a kind of a proxy thing going on there where we support another country being nationalistic, but we're still so self-flagellating about being British and our own heritage in this country. I think that's really sad. I think more people should be patriotic about being British and confident in who we are.
Do you think, though, I sense, it could go either way, but I sense that there could be a return of a need for and a celebration of and a championing of individual national identity that doesn't necessarily have to be about nationalism and all of the negative connotations there. I wonder, do you think that individual populations might have reviewed the last few years and thought we might do better if we had more autonomy, more control, and we could make decisions?
No, I think we're culturally completely lost at the moment. So I'll give you an example. Now lockdown's over, I thought I would be returning to all the cultural pursuits I used to have, but it seems if you want to enter a National Trust property, you need to don a celiche and whip yourself as you walk around because The National Trust property owners had slaves at some point. Now, I want the historical information. I don't want to be made to feel ashamed or have to suffer a sermon every time I visit our cultural gems. So no, I think actually there's still quite a lot of shame about being patriotic in our nation.
Is that self-flagellation and self-loathing that, yes, I agree with you, that's absolutely de rigueur at the moment. Is that a byproduct of globalization? Is that coming from there? Is it part of reminding us that the past, which was made of individual nation states, was tainted? Is it in itself a byproduct of the push to be just one world order?
I do think there is some sense of this, when you try to ally with certain people who you have been at war with for hundreds of years, there has to be some sense of, oh, well, that was the past. We're nothing to do with that. We're one in-group now. Those people in the past, we disavow completely. They aren't our history. They aren't our forebears. We disown them completely. But when you lose your history, you lose your future because you've got nothing to draw from. You have no identity, you have no traditions, you have no culture, you have no myths, the sort of things that underpin the way that people behave and interact with one another. And things become sort of a bland, grey sludge, and you find that there is this very kind of managerial, globalist, grey, bureaucratic thing emerging where there is no culture, there are no songs, there's no literature, nothing is allowed anymore, everything's sort of been cancelled. And the only things that we have now in common are these slightly platitudinous, boring, dull, international ideas, which I don't think hold up.
My instincts go the other way. The more I am told to disavow the past, the more determined I become to own it and celebrate it. It won't work on me being told to be ashamed of and to see only the bad side of anything and everything. Really winds me up and only inspires me to reconnect with my lifelong held understanding of what this place as an entity has to tell us. And it's a long story woven through with light and dark, triumph and disaster. And that's what makes it an unforgettably unique and special place. And the more people tell me, no, it was all just a mistake, it was all just bad, goes off of me like water off a duck's back. I don't buy it.
I agree with you, and I don't think it's because we're rare birds here. I think there's a lot of people that feel like that. It's just not what is represented in a lot of popular culture and media and institutionally. But I think a lot of people feel the same. I don't know. I've got no fix on that. But there's something about the kind of that sort of messaging. You could almost call it a form of inadvertent propaganda. Sometimes what it's designed to do is not change how you think, but to show you the strength of that, like you can't fight against it because it's silencing. And I think there's a lot of people that actually do love the country, feel patriotic, and aren't really that confused about their heritage.
Benjamin, do you think it's realistic if we were to move away from that globalisation, where we have learned to expect for 20 years or so that everything will somehow be made somewhere else and will just come here on an enormous ship and be delivered within 12 to 15 hours by a click of the button online?
Yeah.
Do you think there will be, in the years ahead, an appetite to have exploit our own sources of energy, to grow more of our own, to make more of our own? Or is that time simply past? Is that an anachronism?
I don't think it's past. I think, we did pretty well for thousands of years, into the last 50 years that we've had increasing globalism. I don't see why we couldn't go back to producing things ourselves. We've got, for example, North Sea gas, which we're not even bothering to extract. We're too busy importing it all. What I think is the main problem is that we are very good at patting ourselves on the back ethically and saying, well, we've got these certain standards for trade and production and manufacturing and energy and all the rest of it, whilst importing from places like China, which don't have those standards. But all we're doing there is outsourcing our slavery and our abuses. The things that are occurring in China in order to produce the things that we're importing means that we're actually producing, we are the reason for that happening. We set such high standards that it became so expensive because we pay people a proper living wage and all the rest of it, that it's cheaper to get it from China. We just need to get used to having less and not disposing of things so easily.
So we're just outsourcing our bad behaviour?
Yeah, completely, and our emissions as well.
Yes. Yes, exactly. I share though with you, Laura. I'm so glad you that you took that line with the whole concept of globalization. That it is time, I think, to reconnect with what this place has been and why it has brought us to where we are, and for all of those reasons why it could continue to support us. I think there is these are hopeless times for a lot of people, and times without meaning, and to reconnect with a sense of place, for want of anything else, I think would be a great panacea. People, for want of something to believe in, could believe in Britain.
That sounds like a brilliant political slogan. Believe in Britain. No one's ever said that, have they?
But I mean it. I don't mean it in any. I don't mean it in any hyperbolic sense. This push, as you rightly pointed out, to diminish and to dismiss and to run down thousands of years of history. I see no useful end game there, unless it's to play into the globalization. And yet, as we've seen for the last couple of years, globalization is imperfect, to say the least.
But it's also short term, because people forget that we were colonised by the Romans, who slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Britons and destroyed the oral tradition, history, and the religion of the time. It's a tale as old as time, isn't it? I'm talking to the historian. I don't need to tell you.
No, but it's so. Historians are redundant unless as many people as possible are also aware of the history. You can be a resource, you can be a reservoir of the history, but if it's not percolating down through society and affecting the way and informing the way that people think, then it has no utility. It serves no purpose. It has to be out there in the broader society, being generally celebrated and understood.
I do think, though, that the cultural force of how much, Shakespeare, Milton, you go through all of British culture and history, it's impossible to suppress in one generation. It's like plucking out a weed and throwing it away and it just grows back. You can only suppress it for a certain amount of time. I think the root runs so deep that you might be able to pull it out, but it's still under there.
I think that's absolutely the case. We're being sold a dummy. They're trying to persuade us that our history is only skin deep.
Indeed.
And that they can rip it off like a Band-Aid, and it might briefly smart, and then it'll be gone. But it's not like that. It goes all the way down.
And it's in us as well. It's deeply rooted.
Another break is upon us, after which we'll be discussing the impact of a cashless society on charities, for example. But first, I think it's the weather.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking largely dry and fine after a cold and frosty start for many. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and for many it will be a frosty but sunny start. Western Cornwall, however, will see more in the way of cloud with an increasing breeze. Further east into southeast England and East Anglia, there will be a plenty of sunshine around first thing. It'll be cold though, with a widespread rural frost. Wales and the Midlands will also get off to a frosty start, but there'll be some high cloud around, making the sunshine hazy. Northwestern England may see a fair bit of cloud first thing, but this should break up to allow some sunny intervals. Towards the coast, we may also see the odd spot of rain. Moving across the Pennines, and we will be back into the sunshine during the morning. The clearer skies, however, will give us a widespread frost first thing, especially away from the bigger cities. Up into Scotland, and there will be some wintry showers, but many southern areas should be dry. It'll be a cold start with perhaps the odd slippery patch around. Finally, over into Northern Ireland, and it will be a little less cold here, but it'll also be cloudier. The best of any sunshine will be in the east. Looking ahead towards lunchtime, in many parts will remain dry with sunny spells, although rain will reach the far west. And that is how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
On Mark Dolan tonight in the news agenda with my all-star panel, including radio and Fleet Street legend Mike Parry. Is Rishi Sunak too rich to be Prime Minister? As the Beckhams reportedly pay more than £1 million for Brooklyn Beckham's nuptials, are posh weddings morally wrong? Plus, we'll speak to the author of a stunning new book about the dangers faced by journalists reporting the troubles in Northern Ireland. In The Big Question, are we too obsessed with sex in modern Britain? And in my big opinion, it's time to fix our housing crisis. Build, baby, build. See you at 9.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. Now, more and more there is talk of a cashless society. Gone forever, we are told, might be notes and coins we have taken for granted. The consequences of such a move would be profound. For one thing, without the cash option, your bank, and by extension the state, would see every transaction you make, great and small. The days of the so-called black economy, when cash changes hands without the government having the opportunity to tax it, would finally be over. Suffering already in a world in which fewer and fewer people carry cash anyway are charities dependent on collecting notes and coins. I'm joined now by Darcy Myers, Chair of Trustees for the Smallwood Trust and the Association of Charitable Organisations. Darcy has worked in the charity sector for 30 years and now advises governance and strategy. Good evening, Darcy. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. It's good to be with you.
Tell me, first of all, what are the specific challenges that are faced by small charities in this changing economic world?
Well, if you think there are sort of 164,000 charities in the UK, the vast majority of those, 80%, are small charities. So they have been the group of charities that have been most hit by the move to cashless, and that has been exacerbated with COVID, of course. So I think the government has predicted that by 2026, only 21% of any transactions will take place with cash. So that is a massive move, and charities need to be moving now to adapt to that. And for small charities, not only have they had the impact of COVID to deal with, they have had the cost of changing the way in which they raise the money.
How have these tens of thousands of small charities that you're talking about actually fared since 2020 and the advent of so much that's changed?
Well, one charity I was talking to earlier in the week said, and they're a military charity, they said they have been devastated by COVID and an inability to raise the money they need to raise, because almost all of their fundraising was face-to-face through small events and through direct high street collections. Now, of course, it is now possible to have contactless collection boxes and contactless street collections. But if you're not geared up for that as a charity, and indeed if you weren't geared up for it before the pandemic hit, that's really difficult to adapt to.
I wonder also if in the short term, at least people might be understandably hesitant maybe about transacting with high street charity collections in that way. I wonder if it feels more vulnerable that rather than handing over a £1 coin or a £5 note or whatever to enter into that electronic transaction, I wonder if there's just a hesitancy.
Well, it's adapting, isn't it? It's something that we're not used to doing, but actually it's an increase in security. There's less chance of fraud through using contactless, and for charities, small charities, they're actually able to adapt quite quickly. As I said, there's a challenge of being able to afford to change, but they can be quite agile, and it does bring opportunities to be more long-term relationships. So if people are making online donations, and I think in 2016 you were seeing a sort of 26% increase in one-off online donations, and that is increasing. That actually allows charities to build better relationships with their donors and therefore build trust. And one of the things we have seen over the course of the last 2 years is that public trust in charities has greatly increased.
What does the future hold? And I suppose really what I'm thinking there is, have you been aware of small charities that have actually gone out of, well, business for want of a better word? Have some just been unable to keep going?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, no, I know of 3 charities personally that have had to close down because they were unable to sustain themselves during COVID. Now, some charities, the charitable need, the delivery of their objectives, they were unable to do through COVID. And other charities saw a massive increase in demand for their services during the lockdown. But when we're looking at the move to a more cashless society, I think it is about being prepared to change the way in which we fundraise as charities. I would suggest looking at the use of Facebook appeals and other campaigns online, so you're building your communities and being able to feed back effectively the impact of those donations. And that is actually one of the advantages of a cashless fundraising project.
Is there anything that you would suggest that we, the public, can do in the short to medium term to help? You know, how might people? Is there any way in which we could be supporting charities of which people are unaware? Could we be doing more?
Well, I mean, as I said at the beginning, there are 143,000 charities in the UK. That means there are about 700,000 trustees active, and charities are run by volunteers, by a trustee board. But there are 90,000 vacancies for trusteeships. So that's one appeal I would put out. If you would like to be more involved in your local charity or even a national charity, approach them and find out what the opportunities are for you to be an active member of that charity, whether it is through trusteeship or through volunteering. That is a really powerful way that you can provide practical help. And if you're interested in becoming a trustee, I would suggest you go and have a look at Getting On Board, which is a charity that helps people become trustees.
Darcy, bear with me while I bring in my panel guests who are here with me this evening. Laura, that brings home to me the extent to which the broad-ranging potential impact of stopping using cash. It never even crossed my mind that small, high street collections, rattling tins and buckets and whatever would be impacted, but of course they will. It gives a sense of how far-reaching might be the move away from coins and notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a few things I'd say in response to that. I like giving cash to charities because it feels like I am giving, I am donating. It comes from my pocket, through my hand, into a bucket.
It's like value.
What I don't like is when companies do this kind of automatic suggestion that you can give to charity as well. You know, you're paying for something, you know, you see the service charge, you're like, hang on, what, I'm giving how much to which charity? Now, I don't want to sound curmudgeonly, but that doesn't feel right for me as a type of charity donation. Now, I read some Barclaycard research that said that charities are going to lose out £80 million if they don't make a switch to collecting electronically. But I just want to say, adding on to restaurant bills isn't the way forward for me. I think we have to be careful of saying that we're going to go cashless. We're nowhere near ready to go cashless. Apparently, about 10 million people in this country would really struggle to go cashless. There was the cash review, and that's 3 years ago, and there's the cash census recently. About 10 million people still rely on using cash. 1.5 million people don't have a bank account in this country. And this whole, you know, communities of people, you've got people in rural communities, people who struggle with budgeting, perhaps they're low income, and it's much easier to manage your money, you know, for a lot of people if it's with actual physical cash, people with mental health problems. Now, I was chatting to the taxi driver on the way here. You'll be surprised how often I do a bit of research on the way here in a taxi.
I'm not surprised.
And he's from a Pakistani community, and he said in the shops he goes to, they don't like taking cards because of the transaction fees. So actually, lots of shops still prefer cash. In fact, I think it's 1 in 4 high street shops say that cash is still the most popular way for customers to pay. So cash isn't going anywhere, at least not in the next generation, I don't think.
Do you agree? Do you think... It strikes me that we've had cash, we've had coinage and the rest for thousands of years. Can one generation of government really do away with something so entrenched?
No, I don't think so. Even if you get rid of cash, people will continue to trade in sort of tangible assets because that's the most natural way to do so. When you sort of make cash a sort of a non-tangible thing where all the transactions are just numbers on a screen, it becomes very sort of abstract. I think physical transactions are a natural thing. And I think it's less the charities that we need to worry about, of course we do, but also homeless people. At the moment, they're reliant a lot on people just go, I've got a bit of change in my pocket, I'll throw it in the cup. You know, you can't expect homeless people to go out and get card machines and set up a system and have a bank account. They can't get bank accounts because they don't have addresses. You know, the cycle is the problem. So I do think there's a number of areas where losing cash is going to become a huge issue. But fundamentally, I think you remove currency from the gold standard or from you create fiat currency, and then you put it all online so you can't trade physically. The natural thing is that people will just find another way to trade. So the more abstract that the currency becomes, the less it means anything and the less it actually dominates the way that people continue to trade. That would be my reading of it.
Can I make a little mini future trend prediction as well? I actually think, shall I go out and say it? I'll say it. I think we're going to have more cash in the near future because there's a lot of mistrust at the moment about cybercrime and fraud. Yeah. Personally, I'm sick to the back teeth of all the questions my bank asks me when I want to do something with my money. And do you know what's really simple about getting out a wad of cash? I don't have to spend 10 minutes answering questions about what I wanted to use my money for with the bank. I mean, have you seen people queuing outside ATMs in Russia? Yeah, so at the moment, there's this kind of like, people want
there's an instinct to want to actually have your hands on physical value.
Yes.
Something that actually is tangible.
Under the mattress sort of level. Now, I was at a dinner party the other week and very well-to-do couple were talking about how they have a lot of cash in the house now and wait for it, gold. Because they're not sure how things are going to go in the world. And I think actually people want to return to having cash in their pocket, in their hand, and gold under the mattress or under the floorboards in times when they're worried about... I mean, we keep being told that cybercrime is our next big threat. So what do people feel safe with? Money, physical money.
So we had that thing with stockpiling. I think it's the same instinct. As soon as things start to go wrong, people go, I need actual things, tangible assets, not just abstract numbers on a screen. Because the moment the banks say, no, you can't spend that money, we've frozen it, or there's nothing to buy with it, you know, what good is that money? You can't eat numbers on a screen. People start stockpiling, they start buying gold, they start buying, you know, whatever else.
Darcy, I'm assuming that you're still with us and still listening to what my guests are saying. There is something very very physical, visceral, isn't there, about that the cash transaction? I know exactly what Laura means when I see the Royal British Legion and the poppy collection, in every October and running up to November. I like to part with cash. It makes it a more complete well, it's not a transaction, is it? It's a more complete gesture somehow. And I, like Laura and like Benjamin, I feel that not only because of charities, but in so many ways in society, there is a hunger and a need to retain cash, so that I think we will continue to see buckets and cans rattling on the high streets and elsewhere, because I don't think cash is going anywhere.
Well, yes, I think Laura makes a good point as well about parts of society that are still very much cash orientated. But on average, an individual supports about 5 charities in a year, so that they have maybe 2 or 3 that they have long-term relationships with, and that moving into a more cashless transaction with those charities is understandable and easier. But it's the small donations that you are outlining, whether it's a high street collection or your local scouts or whatever it is, that is very much a cashless transaction, as you say. So I think that will remain, but we are moving to a cashless society, and I don't agree that we're going to stay a cashed society. I think within the next 5 years we'll see many more opportunities to pay cashless. I mean, I was a bit of a Luddite. I was very slow to start using my phone to pay contactless, and indeed I needed a few lessons from my daughter to show me how to do it. I think I've got the hang of it now, but it is just a gradual move, and I think COVID has moved that on much more quickly.
Such an important consideration that you've made us aware of this evening. So thank you so much, Darcy Myers, Chair of Trustees for the Smallwood Trust and the Association of Charitable Organisations. Thank you for being with us tonight. I tell you what really burns me is I want there to be transactions that I can make for whatever reason that don't leave a trail that some interested bureaucrat can look up. If I buy a newspaper or a cup of coffee or a bottle of wine, I want that to be between me and the newsagent and the barman and the off licence. I don't want it to be the case that someone can just go and see exactly what I was doing with my money at any given moment of the day.
Well, there is that sort of the whole data aspect to it as well. If they can look at everything you've purchased, the way that you've spent your money, you might turn around and say, oh, sorry, you can't have NHS treatment. You bought too much wine and cigarettes over the past year. So we've looked at it and we've decided that it's not cost effective to save your life.
All fascinating stuff. Speaking of charities, the Brandon and Meadowfield Royal British Legion Club has been going for almost 100 years. But a row over who is responsible for repair work has been going on for half of that time. The club is now desperate and there are fears it could close for good. Our North East of England reporter Rachel Sweeney explains.
In its 1930s heyday, Brandon and Meadowfield Royal British Legion Club was packed every night.
I'm going to charge you.
It's still busy and attracts all ages, from teenagers to veterans. But it's falling apart. The foundations are rotting and the roof is severely damaged. The building is owned by the Royal British Legion and rented by a committee. Club treasurer Lisa Embleton says the charity should pay for the work.
We just want some help. We've paid our rent. We've done everything over the years. We've been a profitable club. Don't let something like this end something that's so important to our local community.
The committee's looking for answers in paperwork dating back half a century.
21 years, and the rent was £1.10.
This valuation deed dates back to 1972. On it, it states that repair work was needed back then. But still nothing's been done. The building is just about still standing. But after 6 storms battered the northeast of England with winds of up to 90 miles per hour, one half of the Legion is completely shut down.
We're currently paying full whack rent for half a building. They've known since last October that we're only at half the capacity, but we're still paying the rent.
The British Legion says the club has a commercial lease and therefore the club committee is entirely responsible for repairs. It also claims that part of the property has been closed off after neglect. Julianne Roberts has lived opposite the Legion Club for 30 years.
If I won the lottery tomorrow, I would pull this building down and build it in brick for them. That's how I feel about this place. And it's so friendly. I mean, County Durham, but this is a little village here, and people love you.
The staff and the people, fabulous. That's all I can say. They're really fun.
The lads crack, the people I love, and
cheap pints.
Cheap pints, that does help.
Fundraising is ongoing, but with every day that passes, more strain is put on the building and costs continue to rise. There's hope, but there's huge uncertainty over the future of this community hub. Rachel Sweeney, GB News, County Durham.
Thank you for that, Rachel. After the break, we'll be talking about the psychology, believe it or not, behind spring cleaning.
Europe is in the grip of the most devastating humanitarian crisis since World War II.
The people of Ukraine are facing unimaginable suffering
as their homes are destroyed and their loved ones are killed.
Millions of people are being forced to flee for their lives, carrying only their children, their pets, and the clothes on their back.
The pain, loss and destruction grows by the day.
The people of Ukraine urgently need our help.
Already a vast humanitarian operation is underway. Britain's Disasters Emergency Committee, or DEC, brings together 15 leading aid charities to respond to overseas disasters quickly and efficiently. These charities include the British Red Cross, CARE, Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision.
Their teams are working on the ground in Ukraine and neighbouring countries to bring vital aid to those who need it most. If you can spare it, your gift to the DEC's humanitarian appeal will go a really long way.
£10 provides essential hygiene supplies for a person for a month.
£50 provides blankets for 4 families.
£100 provides emergency food for 2 families per month.
It's easy to give. You can donate online at dec.org.uk or call the 24-hour donation line on 0370 60 60 900. If you prefer to send a cheque, please post it to the Ukraine Humanitarian Appeal, PO Box 999, London, EC 3A 3AA. To give £10 on your mobile, simply text the word crisis to 70150. Standard network charges apply for calls and you must be 16 or over. Texts are charged at the standard network rate and your £10 donation will be added to your bill.
100% of your donation goes directly to the DEC to save lives and deliver critical support where it's needed.
Welcome back. You've been getting in touch via the usual channels, so I should have a look at some. Alison on Twitter says, I'm sorry, but whose job is it to teach a child to go to the toilet, how to eat their food and how to get dressed in the morning? It's not down to outside sources, it's down to parents. And if they are locked in at home, children should be excelling at these things. Susan on email says, Johnson is a man who has the backing from nearly all of Parliament and has caused hardship to the UK with lockdown and COVID restrictions. We will never recover, and that numpty still says he will do it again. Thank you, Neil. And finally, in my opinion, the issue with kids missing out on school is all part of the dumbing down process that started over 20 years ago. In fact, it's an accelerator. Boris Johnson talks of levelling up, but I think the plan is levelling down after he's bankrupted the economy. Strong feelings expressed there. Keep them coming. Now, spring is, and we all know this, a time for cleaning. The annual spring clean is a time to declutter and to organise and to put our lives in order. A fresh start, a clean slate. The custom has a long history and is found in cultures around the world. In preparation for their new year in the spring, Persians had a custom called shaking the house, when all was made spick and span. The Jewish tradition has it that the house must be thoroughly cleaned for the springtime festival of Passover. And the Catholic Church has a tradition of cleaning the altar and other fittings in advance of Good Friday in the spring. But while spring cleaning has obvious domestic benefits like tidy rooms and well-organised cupboards, it may also improve mood, lower stress levels and make us more creative. That's excellent, isn't it? Psychologist Emma Kenny joins me now to consider the benefits. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
Lovely to see you. I think more than anything, I'm interested by this idea that as well as the practical benefits, there's psychological good that can come from a good old clear out. Do you echo that sentiment?
Yeah, well, bizarrely, I did some research recently with Brabantia, and we took 2,000 people and questioned them about how they felt regarding cleaning, and 76% said that they felt psychologically more at peace when they cleaned, and 1 in 3 felt that it was essential to get the house completely stripped for the summer to kind of psychologically feel like they'd cleansed themselves. But I just think on a common sense level, anybody listening will know that when you have things in order, when you feel like you're on top of things in your world, both internally in your home and externally in your life, you feel psychologically happier because you feel like you're bossing it, so to speak. You feel like you're the person in charge. And I think chaos is one of those situations that can really make us feel like things are out of control and, in a sense, make us feel a sense of panic to some degree. So I don't think that you even need research to evidence that. I think we all know how it feels when everything is spick and span. And as you just said, it is steeped in lots of traditions, because the reality is that when you have a tidy home, you do feel like you have a tidy mind. And that is how most of us feel.
Is it a universal though? Or are there some people who are genuinely happy in their clutter? You know, I mean, we live increasingly.
Yeah.
We live.
I think.
You know, we live increasingly sometimes. I think in these hyper-sanitized bubbles. You know, with antibacterial spray here, there, and everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And all of that. But I do wonder if there isn't a happy medium where there might be something to be said for a little bit of grime.
Do you know, I absolutely mirror the fact that I don't think that people should live in hyper-sanitized environments. I think it's really bad for our health, full stop. So I just think on a health level, we shouldn't be completely obsessed by anything. I think there's a difference between creating order in your life and feeling that everything has a place, because one of the things that does is it cuts down the amount of time that we stress, and we see that. Secondly, people get a state of flow, mental flow, when they clean. So if you think about informal mindful practice, that would include things like gardening, going for walks with nature, making sure that you're not on your phone. The same with cleaning. It just enables you to have that sense of escape and distraction from the busyness of the world around you and just connect you to the present. So that could be really useful. But of course, there's the balance. Look, when you think about the OCD spectrum, so you think about the very extreme of people who just have to have everything in a specific place, that's destructive. Same as you'd have somebody who's ultimately a hoarder, which is again on that similar spectrum to OCD, but people just have their homes packed with so many things that they can hardly move in it. They're obviously bad for people. But somewhere in between, there is a happy medium. Nobody should be wandering around their homes terrified of germs and bacteria. That's a terrible mental state to be in, and you would not be happy. No matter how beautiful your home looked, you would lack a sense of pleasure in your life. You'd be existing, not living. Equally, though, you don't want too much clutter. So I think it comes down to a happy medium, as you have noted. But I think that anybody can benefit from just making sure that they haven't got too much around them, too many things, too many objects. It involves a lot more cleaning. It obviously can increase stresses. But most importantly, it means that you don't really enjoy the zen of your environment. And so when we work with clients, one of the things that we get them to do is to really think about how they articulate their home to some degree, because of the fact that they feel more at peace and ease when things are at least in a place of order.
I write books all the time, and I horrify my wife, because in my study where I work, for the duration of working on one book, things get worse and worse and worse, because I want things to pile up around me, because I need minute by minute access to notes and all the rest of it. But and it gets to the point where Trudy can barely bring herself to come into the room, because she's a naturally tidier person. But I do, when I get to the end of a book and before I start the next one, I have to have a reordering, and I have to get rid of all of that and put all of that away. And then I look down at a desk and I think, oh, that's the colour of my desk. And then I start again. But it's a cycle of cluttering and decluttering, and there's definitely a huge relief from seeing the tidy desk every once in a while.
Yeah, and I think what you've just explained, Paul, then is like a psychological process of something that feels like you have an actual order to why you create this chaos for a period of time, which is be a creative process. And you get musicians, artists, lots of scholars talk about that. So I do think that the great thing about spring cleaning is we're not saying constantly you just have to live on your nerves and make sure everything is perfect. I mean, my own home would be an example of that just not being true. But again, that cleansing that you're talking about, that out with the old, in with the new, I think we've been doing that since the beginning of time. And I think it's what's beautiful about us humans. We have these habits that we stick to and these cycles that we go through. But certainly in my own home, my husband has an office stroke studio that seriously should come with some kind of health warning for fear that somebody's going to be seriously injured walking in there and finding something crushing them. So arguably everybody copes differently. And I wouldn't say it's one rule for all, but what we see from research is genuinely that people who feel that they have a space that feels safe and to some degree clean and they know where things are just tend to feel that they've got more time on their hands. And that's a really powerful thing as well. It's creating space, and creating space isn't just about what we do with our days. It's about how we experience the world around us, which makes us feel that we have some kind of order and time that we can just spend on things of meaning. So it's really helpful.
Thank you, psychologist Emma Kenny. You make perfect sense as usual. That's all from me on Neil Oliver Live. My thanks, as always, to my panel, to Laura and to Benjamin. Thank you so much for being with me. Next up, it will be Mark Dolan tonight. And if all goes according to plan, I will be with you again 7 o'clock next Saturday night. Thanks for watching.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking largely dry and fine after a cold and frosty start for many. Let's take a look at the details. Zooming into the southwest, and for many it will be a frosty but sunny start. Western Cornwall, however, will see more in the way of cloud with an increasing breeze. Further east into southeast England and East Anglia, there will be a plenty of sunshine around first thing. It'll be cold though, with a widespread rural frost. Wales and the Midlands will also get off to a frosty start, but there'll be some high cloud around, making the sunshine hazy. Northwestern England may see a fair bit of cloud first thing, but this should break up to allow some sunny intervals. Towards the coast, we may also see the odd spot of rain. Moving across the Pennines, and we will be back into the sunshine during the morning. The clearer skies, however, will give us a widespread frost first thing, especially away from the bigger cities. Up into Scotland, and there will be some wintry showers, but many southern areas should be dry. It'll be a cold start with perhaps the odd slippery patch around. Finally, over into Northern Ireland, and it will be a little less cold here, but it'll also be cloudier. The best of any sunshine will be in the east. Looking ahead towards lunchtime, and many parts will remain dry with sunny spells, although rain will reach the far west. And that is how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
On Mark Dolan tonight in the news agenda with my all-star panel, including radio and Fleet Street legend Mike Parry. Is Rishi Sunak too rich to be Prime Minister? As the Beckhams reportedly pay more than £1 million for Brooklyn Beckham's nuptials, are posh weddings morally wrong? Plus, we'll speak to the author of a stunning new book about the dangers faced by journalists reporting the troubles in Northern Ireland. In The Big Question, are we too obsessed with sex in modern Britain? And in my